Today's a really big day in the market garden. We have a lot to do. We need to plant our potatoes, which I'm about a month behind on. I should have done this ages ago. And I also want to set up the compost system now that we have waste coming out of the gardens. Lastly, I really want to walk you through and tell you exactly what we think of our new no-dig method. So let's get going. I have gardened in almost every way imaginable, with tools and without tools, and I have to say, with tools is much easier on the body. And I'd like to thank DR Power for sponsoring today's video. I told y'all we were going to set up a new compost area, and we're going to be utilizing DR Power's wood chipper. There's a reason for this. Our area is really dry, which means it takes things a long time to decompose. And so we're bringing in the super high quality wood chipper to help break down what's coming out of our garden, old twigs and even some green things, to build our compost bins. This is gonna pre-break it down so that the compost can go faster, and ultimately we can end up with more compost for our garden beds. DR Power has a ton of high quality garden tools that you can utilize on your homestead or in your gardens to help make your job much easier. Did I mention they're really high quality so you don't have to replace them after just a season or two? I hate when that happens. So let's go set up our compost bin. Make sure you click the link below to check out DR Power's selection of garden tools that's going to make your job much easier. All right, I want to give you the very best advice that I can about starting your own no-dig garden. So let's talk about the pros and the cons that we've experienced with our big market gardens so far. So if you've been following our garden journey, you know that we put all of this in just this spring. So it's only a few months old, and we've already planted really most of the vegetables that'll go in until the end of summer. So first, let's start with the cons of the no-dig garden. The number one con that we have experienced so far with this method is that you have to have a really good source of compost. This method relies on compost as mulch. So if you remember, we laid cardboard down, and then we did 6 inches of compost in our bed and 6 inches of bark in our pathways, which is really simple, right? But if you don't have a good compost, then what you're going to be planting in is not going to be good for your vegetables. We ran into this. I had ordered all this compost last fall, so it had been hanging out on our property for months and months. So when we moved it in here into the beds, it was ready to plant in. Now, as we moved towards the end of the garden, we ran out of that pile of compost and had to bring in another dump truck load. The result of that was we got a compost that was too hot. It wasn't finished composting yet. And what happens when that's the case is that plants burn. So we planted a bunch of broccoli and strawberries and all of my green onions, and they all just died. They just shriveled up, turned brown, and died. Really, the only con that we've experienced so far other than that is just the cost of getting it set up, because compost is fairly expensive. We live way out of the city, and so we have to pay a pretty hefty delivery fee in order to get it to us. So that can be a little prohibitive when you're doing something this big. I really don't want to know the price of my cabbages this year. But other than that, we've been really pleased with how this has gone so far. So if you remember, this was pasture. This was animal pasture before we put these gardens in. We didn't till it, we didn't mow it, we didn't do anything other than just put the cardboard down, put the compost and the bark down. We have had some weeds, and let me show you how we deal with those. These are actually really beautiful, healthy lettuces that the quail just completely devour. And honestly, if I were growing for profit, I would be really worried about that. I like the quail. I like having the birds around. I have a huge covered bed of lettuce that I get to harvest from, so I'm really not that worried about this. It's charming in its own farmy kind of a way. Okay, this is alfalfa, and this is probably the thing I've seen growing up the most. So really the only way this is possible with no dig is if when you layered the cardboard, you didn't get it completely right. If there was any hole in the cardboard, any tear, or the seam didn't overlap enough, weeds will find their way through. But like Charles Dowding has taught us, weeds are not gods. You just have to weaken them slowly over time. These ones I really just pull out because the weeds haven't been so bad. There's been a few areas, and I'll show you, where the cardboard actually maybe got shifted or there was a bigger hole and a lot of weeds came up. When that happens, what I'll do is actually pull the bark aside or pull the compost aside and put a new piece of cardboard down and then move everything back into place. So I have weeded this garden never. I have not that's why I'm up here today. I'm actually doing work. But you can see, here's a alfalfa plant that grew up into the onions. I mean, they pull out so easy. It's one of the things I've really noticed about this method. If you've ever gardened in just regular old dirt, especially dirt that hasn't been farmed in a while, it's really tedious. This is a handy tool that I have that'll sort of just dig up any leftover roots with. So it really doesn't take much time at all. I mean, I remember weeding my onions last spring and it took me an entire 8-hour day because the onions are really small, so they really blend with the grasses and a lot of the weeds. So this is much easier. Also, because the compost is so airy, it doesn't really compact easy. It's not like soil, so you can just stand right on it, which means a lot less leaning over. Now, if I'm tired and I really don't feel like bending down, let me show you the tool that I use to kind of just do a general scrape over the surface of the soil. This is a little tool that I got from a farmer friend of ours who was retiring and selling off his old equipment. I use it all the time. It's really lightweight, which I like. So if you look at this weed here, this is probably, again, with the alfalfa, but this is probably one of our most common weeds. This is Amaranth. We get it everywhere because it's in the orchards around us. And it's just a surface weed. It has really shallow, weak roots. And so it's a great weed to just come into the market garden with this. And I just kind of scrape it around. If it hasn't gone to seed, I don't worry about taking it out of the garden. I mean, you can if you really want it to look nice. The only thing you have to be worried about with this tool is that it's really easy to get excited and a little overzealous and do the same thing to your plants that you're doing to your weeds. So just, you know, have a little hand control. All right, let's talk about the pros of no-dig gardening, which are many. Probably one of my favorites is the ease of planting because you're planting down into the compost. And so when I go to transplant something, again, I just use my little tool here, and that's as complicated as it gets. It's really pleasant to work in. One of my other favorite things about this method and this new garden that we put in is the delineation between the compost and the pathways. This just makes it more enjoyable for me as a gardener. Aesthetically, I find it very pleasing just to know you tend here, you walk here. It's a little, I don't know, a little bit more separate in my mind, I guess, than the garden that we had before that was, you know, pretty much just dirt throughout the whole thing. So I find that part really helpful. The other thing I love about this garden, besides less weeding, is it's just really easy to maintain. It's my easiest garden by far to maintain out of all the gardens that I have and out of all the different gardening methods that I have tried over the years. I also love that we're not utilizing any plastic whatsoever in growing these things. My pepper bed is right there, and every year that I've grown peppers in a market-style row, I've put out a piece of weed tarp and then burned holes to plant my peppers, which helped suppress weeds. But with the no-dig method, I don't have to use any of that, so there's just a lot less waste overall. I mean, we can come in here in just a couple hours, grab any weeds, water, prune, plant, and be done with it, and spend more time in the flower gardens. As with a lot of things, we always start out with the best of intentions and then real life happens. This was a beautiful bed full of cabbages. I have another one over there behind Stu, but the animals got out. They broke through their pasture fence and they came for a little rendezvous in the market garden, and that resulted in a lot of footprints through my beds, and they ripped out a bunch of the cabbages because they're delicious to eat. And so I have some weird spaces here in this bed that was completely full. So I'm just going to interplant my cabbages with some cucumbers and just fill in the space because it would be sad to see all this space wasted. Okay, this poor patch is where I'm going to plant my potatoes. Behind me, I got my russets planted, which are a great storage potato. We're just right outside the market garden now. But I never made it over here, and I still have a bunch of Yukon Gold potatoes to plant. I should have planted these about a month ago. What's been holding me back is that I only have hot compost, and so I can't do the no-dig method in this patch this year because I just don't have enough compost. So instead, what I'm going to do, actually, if you look at this, it is compost. This is all barn waste from the last couple of years. So this is all extra hay and cow manure and sheep manure. It's actually a really high quality soil. The problem has always been just the weeds. So I think what we'll do to get this planted is actually fire up our tiller and till this bed and get it planted, because at this point, I'm gonna be lucky to get a potato harvest. So I guess we better just get to it. It's been a doozy of a day out here. Stu and I were able to weed the entire garden in less than an hour, which is really remarkable considering how many hours that we used to spend weeding. So we got the water on the new potato patch. We have the compost bins all set up and ready to go. But I wanted to show you real quick how to fix your no-dig garden if something like this happens. So weeds pop up, it's going to happen, but I can tell when there's a big patch like this that something's gone wrong with the cardboard. And I've noticed that we've had a few patches like this pop up along this main alley here where we drive the tractor, and we're driving the tractor to dump rocks and compost when we built the garden. So all it takes is a little bit of shifting for something like this to happen. And so what I do if I see a big patch of weeds like this, so this is called bindweed. It's one of our biggest weeds that we have here. And it is, yeah, I think I mean, look, there's no cardboard here at all, which would make sense. I'm just gonna wad these up a bit to pull them out. And now we're just gonna put down a new fresh piece of cardboard. I feel like I've actually become quite the cardboard connoisseur since I started no-dig gardening. There's certain cardboard I really like, certain box shapes that I really like. It's just funny. Just like that. Now, chances are you'll probably only ever have to do something like this maybe once, if you really didn't get it the first time. On the whole, the cardboard's working really well, and there's not a lot for us to patch. The other major thing that we've noticed is that we used wood chips on the pathways, and wood chips really settle. So as they get wet and as they get weathered, they just settle. So a lot of this already needs to be dressed again. And again, that's not something we're gonna have to do all the time, but just this first year as we're getting it going, it's just something you need to consider. And then fresh chips over the top. So I maybe have 4 or 5 spots like this throughout the garden in this entire area. And then after that, we're gonna be done for the day and take a rest, and I think we earned it.